right, so good morning. Welcome to week number 2. We're already in our second week. So how about we start off with the word of prayer? Let me pray for everybody. Lord, we thank you for this new day, this new morning. And Lord, you continue to raise us, continue to grow us, and we continue to learn each and every day. So allow today to be no different. And please, Lord, please be with our class and allow us to learn about leadership, but leadership in your ways. May we follow your ways and may we continue to be encouraged through your word and may we encourage each other through this class and through this session. Please be with us and this class is dedicated to you always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, everyone. So today's agenda, we're going to have a lecture from the book on leadership. So if you read the assignment, you pretty much are going to be familiar with today's content. So we'll look at Apostle Paul's journey through Acts. And after that lecture, we'll take a break. And then following the break, we're going to have a guest speaker. Though it's not going to be live, it's actually a recording of our speaker from last quarter. So we'll be listening to that. After that, we'll take a break and then we'll have our in-class kind of project together when we reconvene. And I'll describe the project at that time. After the project, there's going to be a presentation time. And then after the presentations, that's it for our class today. So that's the overall kind of agenda for today's session. And before I start, do you have any questions either about today's agenda, about last week, assignments, any questions do you have?
No.
Okay. All right, then give me a minute here while I set up the screen. Okay, can you guys see? All right. Can you guys see the screen? Week 2? Yes, I see a nod. Okay. So I see.
Yes.
All right. So, so to begin the lecture here, we're looking at this book. All right. So I hope everyone got a copy of it from last week. This the book on leadership by John MacArthur. So inside of this book by MacArthur, there are 26 characteristics of a leader of leadership. So we're going to look at several each week. And even though you're reading from the book, we're going to see how it's utilized, right? How it's utilized by Apostle Paul. And these lectures are pretty much based from the book in itself. So this is required reading. And, again, I think I mentioned last week, many of us, we have been in ministry, we started ministry, we've been around ministers. So some of these leadership principles and content may sound very familiar to you and you probably have a good grasp of some of them, which is great. And because of that, the contents may sound, a bit repetitive. So please understand, even though we're going over the contents again, it might sound repetitive to you, but please try your best to pay attention and try to look deeper into it. Because actually each principle it can, there's many different layers, right? Such as because it's based on the word. Um, so it could be very deep. It's up to you how you want to take it. So, if you view it this way, even though the topic may not seem very interesting to you, but if you look at it this way with this perspective, the content may become less dry, right? So just do your best and let's try to put our attention, even though some of the content may be familiar to us. All right, so saying that, these are the 3 principles that we're looking at today. A leader is trustworthy. A leader takes the initiative, and leaders use good judgment. All right. So when we start off, we're talking about leadership, and actually, there's a leadership crisis, right, in the world. And, we can see this too from, not just from secular companies or organizations, but also the church is also facing it too. There seems to be, oops, I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Just back. The church too, right? And you can see in our ministries and denomination, like we're always in the need for leaders, right? There's a lack of leaders. And not just our denomination, not just our church is facing it, but other churches too, in world organizations as well. And the reason why there's some crisis in leadership is because there's this moral negligence. So CEOs, we read in the news, right? CEOs, they're bankrupting their companies, major corporations because of greed, many things, right? Greed, there's lying, there's cheating, stealing, swindling, doing things in the back, hiding. And we see this. And we see this not just in the companies too, but we've read stories about the church itself and pastors and ministers who are responsible, whose duty is to serve. But for one reason or another, they become corrupted. They begin serving themselves rather than serving others. And we see this. We see this in the world, and there's a cry for leaders, and there's a cry for people who are noble, who are trustworthy, and this can be found, this is needed in every level in society, right? Business, church, politics, ministers, even families. Right? Families are lacking leaders too. So in the book, Paul talks about character, right? So how do we define character? Well, the definition of character, especially with integrity, it's becoming less and less clear nowadays. Like I remember talking to people, and we always, talk about common sense and how there's like it just seems like there's a lack of common sense nowadays. So, in today's society, clarity, right? The clear moral values, ethical standards, these things are important. And in many ways, these things are lacking. But there's hope. There's hope that there's opportunity for the church. There's opportunity in ministry and schools where godly men and women can step up, right? Can be raised. And they will come out and they can become leaders. And these are people who are prepared to be the right kind of example. Because where there are problems, there are great opportunities too, right? All right, so I want to just play a little video before we start talking about Apostle Paul. This way we can kind of get caught up on what stage in his journey Paul is. So when we start the lecture, through this video, it can help us give a better understanding. So let me start this video. And I'm going to ask you again if you can hear the audio.
We've been exploring the book of Acts.
Can you hear the audio? Okay, great. All right, let me do full screen here.
We've been exploring the book of Acts, which was written by a man named Luke as a continuation of the Gospel of Luke. Acts began with Jesus telling his followers to spread the good news about his kingdom.
And they would start in Jerusalem, then go out to the neighboring regions, and from there to the ends of the earth.
Now, in Jerusalem, their message was received by many and opposed by many, especially by the leaders of the temple. They were scandalized by this new claim that the whole story of Israel had been fulfilled by Jesus' life, death, and resurrection.
One of these leaders was a man named Saul of Tarsus, who worked tirelessly to stop the movement. That is, until he met the risen Jesus himself. And this encounter transformed Saul from an enemy of Jesus into a herald of his kingdom.
And so for years, he traveled about the Roman Empire using his Roman name, Paul, starting Jesus communities all over.
And one of Paul's greatest desires was that all of these diverse communities would see themselves as one unified people, regardless of their differences, Jew or non-Jew, male or female, slave or free.
Jesus was creating one unified family of equals living together under his rule.
And this brings us to the final section of Acts. Back in Jerusalem, where the movement began, the Jewish followers of Jesus were suffering from a drought and food shortage.
And Paul was so passionate about the church's unity that he began a major fundraising project among the diverse churches he had started. They would pool their money together so he and a group of representatives could take it as a relief gift to Jerusalem.
But it's not safe for Paul in Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders there dislike him so much, they want him dead.
And Paul knew he was walking into a trap. His friends all begged him not to go, but no one could stop him.
And why would Paul risk his life to bring this gift? Couldn't he have sent someone else?
Well, for Paul, this was personal. Jerusalem was where he used to participate in the murder of Jesus' followers. And now he gets to serve them. It's also where Jesus himself was executed. And so for Paul, it would be an honor to suffer there alongside his king.
Paul goes to Jerusalem, and as expected, he's found by his enemies. A mob forms, and they try to kill him. But Roman soldiers save his life by taking him into custody.
The Jewish leaders are accusing Paul of starting a revolt against Rome, but they can't prove it.
And the Romans don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, they can see Paul's not a criminal, but his claim that a crucified Jewish man is the risen king of the world, it keeps getting him into trouble.
And so Paul gets transferred from one court to another until he demands that his case be tried before the court of Caesar in Rome. And so they happily ship him on.
Now, throughout this section of Acts, Luke, the writer of the story, has portrayed Paul's trials and imprisonments so that they resemble his previous stories of Jesus's trials and imprisonment. Luke's making an important point. When the people of Jesus follow the way of Jesus, their stories will begin to look like his story, which is beautiful, but it also comes with a cost.
On the way to Rome, the boat carrying Paul is hit by a violent storm, and everyone freaks out.
Except for Paul. He's below deck hosting a meal, just like Jesus did the night before his trial. Paul blesses and then breaks the bread, promising that God is with them through this storm. And the next day, the ship hits and then breaks apart on the rocks, but everyone's washed safely ashore.
Which is amazing. But Paul's not out of trouble. He's taken to Rome and put under house arrest.
But it's not so bad. In his house, he can host groups of Jews and non-Jews, sharing with them the good news about Jesus, the risen king.
This is a bold move in Rome, the center of power where Caesar rules the world as king.
Yes, you have Jesus's alternative upside-down kingdom, now growing in the very heart of the world's most powerful empire, all through the suffering of a prisoner. And with this contrast between kingdoms, Luke ends his story.
That's a great image, but the story's supposed to be about this message spreading to the ends of the earth. So shouldn't it continue?
Of course, Luke has left the story open-ended on purpose, so that his readers would know that the story isn't over and that they can participate in Jesus' kingdom that is still spreading to this day.
All right, so we are back. You can hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Right, so this is Apostle Paul, right? His model of leadership. And we can see that Apostle Paul, his leadership has nothing to do with ties with, the government. There's not a commander of the armies. He's not a nobleman, but God conferred to him the title of apostle, right? God called him to be the leader. And as we start the lectures here, this video, I'm really thankful for the video. It helps give us an overview of where our lecture is going to take place. And this is in Acts 27. But before then, we saw what happened to Paul, how he changed his life, committed his life. And in a way, took charge, right? In some ways, took charge of the situation during hostile environments. So we'll look a little more deeper into that. And even though as we go on with this lecture and we learn more about the deeper story here in Acts, we'll see that there were many other powerful men around him that were present, but they were unable to lead. And in the end, it was Apostle Paul who was called to lead everybody. So, just an oversight here, even though Paul was not a man of high position, but he was a man of great influence. All right, so we start the story here, Caesarea to Rome, right? So this is Paul's journey to Rome. And as mentioned, he was a prisoner on this ship, and he was clearly a very low position prisoner on this ship, right? If you imagine there's a totem pole, a totem pole, and the positions were ranked from the top to the lowest, he would belong at the very bottom, right? He was a prisoner. And in prison, there's all sorts of criminals, right? In prison. They could be criminals, there's murderers, there's thieves. But, among these convicted people, among them were also former leaders, maybe former presidents or leaders of large companies who, did something illegal in their company. Now they're in prison. So you have leaders in prison as well. There are some people who could be famous building contractors who earn millions and millions of dollars. Right? They're very rich, but they lost all their fortune because of fraud or scandal. So in prison, this is a place for those type of people. They incarcerate people who were leaders, who were accustomed to money, accustomed to power, and they knew how to wield authority. So we have leaders in prison. But what happens when they're in prison? They don't have their devices anymore. They don't have their employees or their secretaries. They don't have the fancy clothes or the suits or the ties anymore. All of that is taken away, right? It's all stripped away. And so is their power. They're powerless. These people in prison, they have no power. When they are told to get up, or when they're told it's time to eat, or it's time to exercise, or do the laundry, they have to follow. They have to listen. No prisoner has any authority. So this is Apostle Paul, right? This is his situation. He has no authority. He's a prisoner. He has to sail on this ship that was chosen for him. He did not pick who was on the ship with him. He just had to follow everything. So Paul, he rode on the ship, and there were other authoritative figures on board, right? There's many other leaders, people with great power on board. And one of those persons is the centurion. And there was a centurion on board. His name was Julius. And the centurion, as the name holds, he has 100 men under his command. And he's one of the highest ranking in the Roman army. And he oversees these elite soldiers. So when we read about the centurions in the scriptures, they're described as men of integrity, of respect, intellect, virtues, because you need all of these characteristics to be a leader, to be called a centurion. So here, Julius is no exception. In Acts 27, we can see that Paul was a prisoner, and the centurion was his leader, right? Was his commander. And also on the ship also would have a captain. So this captain would also have his crew, his mates. And all those crew also are sailors. They also have rank. So the centurion, the soldiers, the sailors, the captain, all of these people, they all have higher rank than Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul was the very bottom of everything, the lowest of the low. So the centurion, Julius, he actually showed kindness, right? He was very kind to Apostle Paul. He gave Apostle Paul liberties. He gave him liberties and some freedom to him and to his friends. So he granted Paul permission to leave the shore, right? He can leave the boat, get onto the beach on the shore to receive medical care from his friends, because Apostle Paul was not the healthiest person, right? He was very weak. He fell ill and sick frequently. He was suffering from his health. So this is very unusual, right? This kind of relationship of a prisoner. Like, why would a prisoner have these liberties? Because the definition of a prisoner means you have no liberties, you have no freedom. But Paul here, he was a political prisoner. And Paul was deemed a threat to the Roman Empire. You know, we saw in the video again, he was blamed, right? There were riots, there were crowds in Jerusalem, and he was tried in all types of courts, and he became pretty much a nuisance. And he became so much of a issue that that his case was now to come before the Caesar, right? Before Caesar himself. So you don't have this type of prisoner with liberties without a good reason, right? Paul had this freedom. Why? Why did he have this freedom? Because actually, if we have to know this important backstory too, because with Roman soldiers, right? Roman soldiers has this great responsibility on their prisoner. Because if a prisoner is under their responsibility, under their watch, if this prisoner somehow escapes or he lost track of the prisoner because he was negligent, this Roman soldier had to pay the penalty with his life. Meaning, if you lose the prisoner, you lose your life because he was your responsibility as a Roman soldier. So, knowing this, Julius, right, this rule also applies to him, right? He's a top Roman soldier, he's a top centurion. So, a highly trained soldier, a skilled fighter who commands an army. If he loses Paul, there's some consequence for him too, right? There's a penalty. So a prisoner like Paul, receiving this much liberty, this much freedom, there must be a very good reason why Julius trusts Paul in order to give him this type of freedom. So that leads us to our first principle for today, and that is trust, right? Trust in leadership. So if we look here, trust in leadership includes these items, right? You have followers, you have respect and care, and you look at others over yourself. So somehow during this whole journey, Paul had caused the centurion, this top Roman soldier, to believe that he would never do anything that would cost the centurion personally, meaning he's not going to risk the centurion's life, he's not going to risk the centurion's position. And for some reason, Julius was convinced. He believed Paul. He was convinced that Paul would not take the liberty he would give him to try to escape or run away. So the centurion, he went ahead, right? He gave liberties to Paul. He gave liberties to his friends. And surely Paul must have asked the centurion for permission. And the centurion had no fear in giving Paul this unusual request. So this journey was only one day, right? It wasn't really a quick journey. So Paul obviously had to earn the trust of the centurion, but how did he do it so quickly? You know, he just met, right? How did he earn Julius's trust so quickly? Well, from what we know, from our reading, from how we know Apostle Paul, we know that he is a very godly man, right? He's a very godly man with deep integrity, personal integrity. And it's also possible that we weren't the only ones who know about it from reading it, right? Maybe Paul already had this influence within the society of being this godly man, a man of integrity. So it's possible that this governor, right, the governor who was above the centurion, his name was Festus, he knew that Paul was innocent, as we saw in the video again, right? Many of the Roman leaders in the courts, they knew that Paul was innocent. He wasn't committing any crimes. So this governor probably knew that Paul was innocent and assured the centurion, he told the centurion Julius that Paul could be trusted. So he ordered the centurion to treat Paul with courtesy, right? Giving him some liberties. So in Acts 24 and 23, chapters 24 and chapters 23, Paul, in these chapters, trust has been established for Paul. What the centurion did is exactly what the previous governor, Felix, did in chapters 24, Acts 24:23. So in here, it was said that he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberties, and that none of his friends should be prevented from helping him, attending to his health. So this is very clear evidence. It shows us that Paul earned this reputation of trust. So even the governors under whom he would have, imprisoned him, he knew that they all knew that Paul had this integrity inside of him. So trust is a very powerful thing that we've just seen through this example. Trust is the ability to know that others are safe for us to be around, and that we can be trusted, that we can be around them. We can trust that they will not cause us any harm. And trust in society is like a glue, right? It kind of holds everything together. It holds all the good relationships together in society. So trust is very important. And if you lack trust, if there's no trust there and the glue becomes very weak, then you have all sorts of, suspicion. You have all sorts of doubts. You can lead to believe that others are enemies to you. You become rivals. So a lack of trust is very damaging to not just personal one-on-one relationship, but in society as a whole, right? How can we run a society together with everyone united, working together without trust? It's very important to have it. So how do we know we can trust others? There was a story, and there was a minister who had this painful childhood experience. So, he was sharing the story about when he was younger, when he was a child, and for some reason he was on the roof of his house and he was stuck there. And then his father was standing below watching him, and he was very scared. He was very afraid. He didn't know how to get down. So the father told him, "Oh, yeah, jump here. I'll, jump down and I'll catch you. Okay? Come on, jump down." But the child was still, reluctant. But the father had to keep trying. He kept saying, "Hey, trust me, just jump. I'll catch you. Okay, don't worry." So the son finally built up enough courage. He slid down slowly to the edge of the roof, and then he jumped towards his father, who was putting out his arms, saying, "I'll catch you." But as he was falling down, his father pulled back his arms and stepped back, and he allowed his son to plummet, and fall to the ground. So the son, he was on the ground and he was hurt and he was shocked, and he got back to his feet to ask his father what happened, right? You told me to trust you, and then I jumped into your arms, but you didn't catch me. And then the father just told him sternly, "Son, trust no one in your life." That was the lesson his dad wanted to teach his son. Don't trust anyone in your life. So obviously this was very damaging to the boy as he grew older. He had a lot of trauma in his adulthood, and he had a hard time trusting many people, anybody in life and in ministry. So this is kind of a very extreme example, okay? But we've seen this with people, right? People grow up and they just don't have this trust inside of them. They cannot trust anyone. They've been hurt emotionally in the past, some in some way or another by somebody. So trusting someone was very difficult. It's a big effort for them. And in ministry, right? As you are in church, maybe when you begin to lead a church, lead a ministry, working with others, you'll find people like this, right? There will be people like this who just have something that happened in their life, and and they become very vulnerable, and they cannot be transparent. And how do we deal with that? Right? How do we help them to build up this trust? Because trust is like a long life thing. You develop it from the very beginning. It's very fragile, right? You earn it, you built it, but you can also lose it very quickly. So we're looking at trust today. right? Getting to know people as individuals, forming relationships with others through similarities, through interests. And this is a very important element in leadership, right? Having this trust. Um, we've seen, building trust through doing exercising together, activities together. There's also this thing of falling backwards, this exercise they do where you have to trust your partner will catch you when you fall backwards. Trust is part of taking risks and discovering that others are there for you, right? Trust is when you know that somebody is there not to hurt you, not to damage you, but is there to support you, to help you, and vice versa, and you doing the same thing. So when we do this, when we have this type of relationship and this connection, we form this bond. And that bond is important in leadership and it's important in church, it's important in ministry because it helps lead to higher performance and innovation in an organization. If we don't trust others, if we don't have trust, if we just play it safe and just stick within ourselves, within our own circle, right? Within our own life, within our own office, and don't talk to anybody, things are not going to be very effective, right? But if we trust, if we feel confident, then we are able to share ideas, right? We're more open to talk to people and share our ideas and approaches and innovate together. So by doing this, we can work together to develop a higher level, not just in our organization, not just in our ministry, but also in our life and how we, can raise families and lead others. So here, we went through those 3 items, right, before in the slide. So here we're looking at followers. So what is another form of trust? How can you show proof that there is trust amongst your life, among your society, among your community, among your organization? Well, that's having followers. And followers means companions, right? People around you, companions around you. That's how you know that you have trust, when you have people surrounding you. So Apostle Paul, he had friends, he had companions. And here his companions, Luke and Aristarchus, they were very devoted to him. They followed him. They were very concerned about his well-being, about his health. They did not abandon Paul. Even Paul, who was a prisoner on this ship, he was imprisoned. They went with him. They followed him. They accompanied him all the way to Rome. And these trips are not fun trips, right? They had to go at their personal risk. They're risking their own lives to follow Paul onto this journey. And riding on the ship to Rome, it wasn't not like a luxury boat or a cruise or anything like that, right? It was a small Roman sail vessel. The space, there was not a lot of space, very uncomfortable, very tight. And it was believed that the only way for Luke and Aristarchus to board the ship with Paul was that if they also agreed to take the role as a slave, right? Take that position as a slave in order to board the ship. And also getting on the ship, they also probably had to pay a fee, right? It wasn't free. They pretty much what I'm trying to say is it costed them. It was not a free ride. They had to sacrifice something to follow Apostle Paul. So it was a major sacrifice for Luke and Aristarchus to do what they wanted to do. And they did it because they had this love for him, this love for Paul. They were clearly trusted in him and committed to him. So no one inspires such devotion without trust, right? Without being trustworthy. Oops. Oh, sorry. It's not working. Okay. Sorry, the computer just kind of jumped around a bit. Let me get back to my spot here. All right, so the next thing we're looking at is followers versus employees. Okay, so what are these terms? If you look at Luke and Aristarchus, were they followers or did they work for Paul? Were they Paul's employees? That's why they were following him. So let's look at these 2 terms, follower versus employee. Here in Anza, we go to Temecula, right, to do our shopping. And, there's a big store called Walmart in Temecula. And if you go to Walmart, once you go in the door, there's always somebody sitting there at the main entrance. They're greeting people, they're checking your receipts. And when you go to Walmart, and let's say you meet this person at the door and you ask him this question, him or her this question, and you say, "Hey, are you a follower of Walmart?" And if you ask this question, what do you think their reaction will be? Right? You go up to them, "Hey, are you a follower of Walmart?" They might give you this weird look. They're like, no, I'm not a follower of Walmart. I'm just an employee, right? I work for Walmart. I'm an employee. So when we're in ministry, right, when this term comes up, when we're serving the Lord, um, are you a follower or are you an employee? How would you respond? Um, you know, when you say I'm an employee, you're saying, okay, well, yeah, I'm just an employee. I just work here, right? I have a contract with this organization. That's my relationship with this organization. It's just a contract, right? I just receive a paycheck. I do what I'm supposed to do. I have my role. Yeah, I have great admiration for the CEO of Walmart or the president of Walmart. I respect them. I respect the organization, but I'm not a follower of Walmart. I just work. I just work there. So, when we're in ministry, if somebody comes up, you're sitting at the door, how would you respond? Am I just an employee of the church? I respect Jesus. I respect God. I respect what he's doing. But I just work here. That's all. That's my relationship. I just work. I just get paid. I just do what I'm supposed to do. And that's it. That's my relationship. Nothing more, nothing less. So that's an employee. A follower. What is a follower? The term follower is reserved for someone who is really part of a movement, right? They're part of a movement, they're part of a vision. They hold the values of this movement. And the follower voluntarily identifies themselves with that movement. Um, they are one with the cause, they are one with the vision. And the word is voluntary, right? This is important. Voluntary, meaning even though I know it's a cost, but I'm willing to do, I volunteer to do, I dedicate my time or resource or whatever. I'm sacrificing something because I believe in this movement, in the vision, in the values, in the symbol of this movement. And, that's a big difference between an employee and a follower. An employee is somebody who's paid to do something, and somebody who follows is somebody who does it voluntarily, right? Big difference. So the dynamics, the difference, right, between a leader and a follower, we're looking at this now. The leaders are the ones who motivate the followers, but also the leader are the ones who serve the followers. Okay. So again, leader and follower. The leader motivates the followers, but they also serve voluntarily, serving their followers, their people. So you guys heard the term servant leadership. Right? I don't know, have you heard that term before? Servant leadership. I see a few nods. Okay. Well, servant leadership. The term servant leadership was introduced by somebody named Robert Greenleaf. Okay, his name is Robert Greenleaf. And um, this paradigm of servant leadership, it's been used and it's been popular and integrated into businesses, schools, education systems, nonprofits. And Robert Greenleaf, he asked this question. The question is, do those served grow as persons? Okay, he's kind of asking the leaders this. The people that you serve, do they grow as persons? And also, do they grow while being served? Do they become healthier, wiser? Do they become more free? And are they likely to become servants themselves under your leadership, right? Under servant leadership. So servant leadership really resonates with Christians, right? Because Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, Jesus said this, Mark chapter 10, verse 45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So in relations to his followers, right, a servant mindset was this model when Christ washed their feet. For Christian leaders and followers, these are really powerful messages that challenges us, right, to really pursue this humble image, this humble service. And this is the fundamental character required for Christian leadership, what we're looking at today. So next we're talking about respect and care. Okay, so we're going from leadership, serving to respect and care. So it's certain that Paul, Apostle Paul, would have treated the centurion, right? This, in a way, his higher above authority, his leader here, he would have treated the centurion with a lot of respect, right? They must have probably conversed together, talked a lot with each other, shown interest in each other's lives. And Paul must have developed a quick liking. They must have had this good relationship. He liked the centurion and vice versa. The centurion probably liked Paul a lot as well. And Paul showed respect to the centurion, and the centurion showed respect back to Apostle Paul. There's a two-way thing here, relationship. So in only one day, right, this short trip, just one day, the centurion already trusted Paul enough to give him so much liberty and some freedom. So how does a leader build this type of trust? This type of trust where somebody is so convinced that you will do everything in your power for their own benefit, for their good, and that you are not going to harm them. Right? This is the type of trust we want to get to. So the centurion was very convinced that Paul was honest and Paul had the best interest at heart for him. And he was convinced that Paul was not going to escape, because if Julius had the slightest concern that Paul was going to escape, then there was no way that he would give him this freedom to just roam the beach, to roam the shore, to get off the boat. He would have had Paul under tight security, under watch. So as principle number one, right, all leadership begins here, to have this trust, because Paul cared for Julius. He cared about his well-being. He didn't want to get him into trouble. He respected his responsibilities, and he did not want to discredit or dishonor him or jeopardize his life. So the power of Paul's character really influenced Julius, because Paul was a prisoner. And in fact, Julius was his captor. But then Paul really showcased this very noble character. So others over self-gain. So Paul was putting the centurion above himself, right? He cared for the centurion. He cared for Julius and put Julius above Paul's own self-interest. And this is a good example of leadership, because a leader is not someone who is consumed with your own success, with your own self-interest. A true leader is someone who demonstrates to everyone around them that their interest is for other people, for others. They're trying to make others around them, everyone around, more successful than themselves. So Apostle Paul, his passion was to help to make people under his leadership flourish. So that's what a true leader must have in their heart, right? Again, this heart of a servant, serving others. A person cannot be a true leader and operate only for personal gain. right? These leaders have motives of, they showcase motives of being selfish. And in the end, they end up leading nobody because everyone will abandon them, right? Why would you stick around somebody who has no interest in you, right? Because they cannot be trusted. So a person of leadership will succeed only when people trust them with their future, with their money, and in some cases, even with their lives. So nothing can really take place. Trust is very important. A person who can have power and they can force somebody to do something, whatever they want to do, but that's not really the true essence of leadership. Because you can notice that genuine leaders are always the ones that are surrounded by people, right? There are people who know and trust them and know that they're caring for them. And they know that this person is capable, so they follow him, as we see it with Luke and Aristarchus, with Apostle Paul. And this devotion is based, again, on trust. So having this trust as leaders, right, as godly people, we can use this energy, right? We can use this passion for the benefit of others. So if you can show people that you have your interest in them at heart, then people will begin to follow, right? You'll be surrounded by people. So when Paul returned and he did not escape, right? When the centurion gave him this freedom, he went out, but he kept his promise and he came back. He proved the trust, right? He proved that he himself was worthy to Julius, the centurion's trust. And as time went along, this trust built up. Again, Paul went out, and as promised, he returned and came back. He built this trust, and he further and further strengthened his character and his leadership throughout his journey. So as the story of Paul continues in Acts 27, we're soon going to witness how he became completely in charge, how somebody from the very bottom of the rank, the very bottom of the totem pole, at the end became at the top. And everyone was around him, everyone depended on him. He became the leader. All right, so here we look at this map, just have a better geographical understanding of where this journey took place. So we look here, as he made his way to Rome, he had to cross the Mediterranean Sea. So can you see my mouse on the screen? Okay. All right, so it's a straight shot. Here, Sidon, they had to cross over to a town called Myra. And you can follow the arrows here. It kind of went around Cyprus back here. I think typically they would kind of go this way, right? They would go here and hit Myra, but they went around Cyprus. And the reason was there were winds, very strong winds at that time. So they took this route. They went around, they went to Myra. And Myra, we have to know that that town was a very busy town, right? It was busy. It was a busy port for import, export because there was grain there. And from Myra, they boarded onto a bigger ship. So they went from a small ship and went to a bigger ship with lots of cargo because they wanted to export some of the grain out of that port. So it was said that maybe a bigger boat would carry about 256 people. So there was enough room for 256 passengers. And at the same time, there was room for cargo. So they put a lot of cargo in here. And these boats were built for long journeys at sea. Okay, so from Myra, they went to Cnidus, which is here. So they would travel along the shore on this bigger boat. And as they were reaching Cnidus, the winds were still pretty strong. So the winds were blowing them south. So as they were trying to approach here, but the wind kept pushing them south, 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 south. So in the end, they couldn't reach their destination, but they were forced to go to this other island, Crete. Crete was the name of this island here. So the wind kind of forced them to land here. And as they were approaching this island, um, they wanted to, move quickly. Actually, the atmosphere on the ship was everyone wanted to move quickly because they had all this cargo on board. They wanted to make money. So if you lose time, you lose money. So they had all this cargo. They wanted to get it to their destination. So the wind forced them here, and they landed in Fairhaven. It's called Fairhaven's port. So they landed here, and they were stuck. The winds were preventing them from traveling. And many of the people on board, they were trying to convince the captain that, hey, let's go anyways, right? We need to go. We need to get our cargo out, even though there was this horrendous windy storm happening. So Apostle Paul was on board, obviously, and he saw all of this. He knew what was going on, and he can kind of see that, hey, this is not a good idea, right? You shouldn't be going on a boat during a storm. And he can see a disaster happening because actually Paul experienced shipwreck before. This was not the first time that he's been on a ship during a storm. So from experience too, he can see that this is not a good idea. The winds were not favorable. So Paul encouraged everyone to, hey, let's wait here at Fairhavens. Let's not leave. Let's not be so haste and wait until the storm passes. But again, everyone wanted to take that risk. They wanted to go. They wanted to make a profit, right? They were willing to gamble their lives to not stay there at the port, but to continue on. And after a lot of, back and forth and a lot of protest, and finally the centurion listened to the crowd and the captain themselves. So they all decided, let's go. Let's continue on with our voyage. So Paul, right? Paul was advising them that he was, even though he was a prisoner, but he was advising everybody, the sailors, the captain, the centurion, that, hey, this is not a good idea. So now this is kind of leading us to our second principle of today. And that is taking initiative. So the second principle is leader takes initiatives. So here we are again. We are at, actually, let me check the time here. Okay, we're actually approaching, over 50 minutes now. Do you want to take a little break before we continue on with this part of the lecture? How about we take a little break?
Yeah.
You want to do 10 minutes?
Okay.
Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back, at 9:05, okay? All right.